Hi boys and girls. Are you guys ready for story time today? I miss doing this with you guys. I figured today we would read The Best Nest because it's spring and all the birds are outside and I see how they're all chirping and today's a beautiful day for it. So, Mr. Bird was happy. He was so happy he had to sing. This was Mr. Bird's song. I love my house, I love my nest, in all the world my nest is best. Then Mrs. Bird came out of the house. It's not the best nest, she said. I'm tired of this old place, said Mrs. Bird. I hate it. Let's look for a new place right now. So they left the old place to look for a new one. This place looks nice, said Mr. Bird. Let's move in here. But somebody else had already moved in. So they looked at another house. This one looks nice, said Mr. Bird, and there's nobody in it. That's a stinky house, right? It's all smelly as an old boot. You're wrong, said Mrs. Bird. This house belongs to a foot. So they went on looking. I like this one, said Mr. Bird. It has a pretty red flag on the roof. I've always wanted a house with a flag, said Mrs. Bird. Maybe this place will be all right. But it was not all right. I guess I made a mistake, said Mr. Bird. You make too many mistakes, said Mrs. Bird. I'm going to pick the next house. And here it is, right here. They flew in. They looked around. Isn't it too big? Asked Mr. Bird. I like this big place, said Mrs. Bird. This is the place to build our next house. They went right to work. They needed many things to build their nest. First, they got some hay. Then they got some soda straws and some broom straws. And then they got some sweater string. Then they got some stocking string and some mattress stuffing. They got some horsehair and they got some man hair. Soon they had all the hay and the straw and the string, all the stuffing, all the horsehair, and all the man hair that they could carry. They took it all back to their nest. Mr. and Mrs. Bird worked very hard. It took them the rest of the morning to finish their nest. This nest is really the best, said Mrs. Bird. I want to stay here forever. Mr. Bird was happy too. He flew to the top of his house and he sang his song. I love our house, I love our nest, in all the world our nest is best. He was so busy singing, he didn't even see Mr. Parker coming. Every day at 12 o'clock, Mr. Parker came to the church. Mr. Parker came to pull the rope. The rope went all the way up to the bird's new nest. Uh-oh. The rope rang a big bell that was right under Mrs. Bird's nest. Bong, bong. Mrs. Bird got out of there as fast as she could. And the bell's still going bong, 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 bong. When Mr. Bird came in, all he could see was a mess of hay and string and stuffing, horsehair and manhair and straws. But where was Mrs. Bird? I will look for her until I find her, said Mr. Bird. He looked high and he looked low. He looked everywhere for Mrs. Bird. He looked down into a chimney, but Mrs. Bird was not there. He looked down in the water barrel, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there either. Then he saw a big fat cat. There was a big fat smile on the fat cat's face, and there were some pretty brown feathers near the cat's mouth. Mr. Bird began to cry. Oh dear, he said. This big fat cat has eaten Mrs. Bird. Mr. Bird flew off. I'll never see Mrs. Bird again, he cried. It was getting dark, and it began to rain. It rained harder and harder and harder, and Mr. Bird could not see where he was going. Crash! He bumped right into something hard. It was his old house, that old house that Mrs. Bird hated. I'll go inside, said Mr. Bird, and I'll rest here until the rain stops. Mr. Bird went in, and there was Mrs. Bird sitting there singing, I love my house, I love my nest, in all the world this nest is best. You here? Gasped Mr. Bird. I thought you hated this old nest. Mrs. Bird smiled. I used to hate it, she said, but a mother bird can change her mind, you see. There's no nest like an old nest for a brand new bird. And when the egg popped open, the new bird thought so too. And that's the end of the story. So when you guys go for walks, just like you saw in this story, the blue shell, see how that bird popped out of the eggshell? That's what we're gonna have to start looking for when we go for walks. So when you're by all the trees, see if you guys can find any eggshells. And if I find any, I'll definitely show them to you, okay? Bye, guys.